You're very welcome this evening. I don't do so much at this point. I'll leave you in the hands of Nick. And then at the end, I'll stand up. And when I stand up, you know it's coming to the end. And we'll see what questions people have got for you. I hope you enjoy being here. Now, if this was reversed and I was sitting there, I'd know how the evening went, because when I got in the car, I'd have somebody telling me. Now, I don't know if Jill's like that, but right. But you're very welcome, and I'm handing over to Nick. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, good evening, Al. We have a very eventful life to discuss, and we'll come to that in a moment. But let's first of all establish what you're doing now. You're running a charity called People International. What does that do?
So People International is a mission organisation that seeks to reach the Muslims of wider Central Asia. So predominantly the Stan countries, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan and the rest of the Stans, most of which people generally haven't heard about. It's actually the least reached region of the world with the gospel, and it has the fewest number of gospel workers in comparison to anywhere else in the world. So it's a ministry and a position that I thoroughly enjoy in the right sense and feel incredibly fulfilled doing.
And this end of the Stans, you have a very well-known country, Turkey, and since the earthquakes, you've been quite involved in Turkey, haven't you?
Yes, we include Turkey in wider Central Asia because Turkey is so influential across that part of the world that you can't take it out in terms of language as well as geography and travel locations. But certainly we've been involved in working in Antakya, which is the old Antioch, and we have a worker who is based there, and I think at this point we've sent out about £45,000, and that's gone to immediate aid relief, and it's also now going towards more sustainable help in terms of porta cabins, clean water systems. But one of the things that we're really keen on is that 100% of the money that has been given to us, 100% goes out to Turkey. We're not a charity that takes a cut on the way.
Now, you're very hands-on, and I think you and Jill travel to support your workers, and they sometimes have quite a tough job.
Yeah, our workers have a really tough job. It's lonely, sometimes, and if you happen to be a single female, it's incredibly lonely and difficult because the culture says that you can't go out at night on your own, so come a winter evening, you're stuck inside, and the life of females out there can be quite tricky and difficult. But for all our workers, they're in challenging circumstances. They're not allowed to be missionaries, mission workers out there and tell people the good news of Jesus officially. So we are involved in working alongside the National Church and also some pioneer work, reaching people groups that have never been touched with the gospel.
And your workers, and you and Jill, when you go out, spend time with pastors and believers who are actually being persecuted.
Yes, I've spent quite a lot of time out in Central Asia last year. I spent 7 weeks in one particular Stan country, 2 in another, and then various other trips. And I spent a lot of time teaching and working with pastors and listening to their stories of their times in prison, where their little church, their little cell church, their home church, because they can't have official registered churches, and were raided by the police maybe 2 times a year, or the laptops taken, or the phones taken. Of course, they never come back. They're kind of siphoned off. And yeah, it's been really tough. But the persecution in some of the countries has diminished in the last perhaps 4 or 5 years.
That's good. Let's go back to your early years. You studied Bible studies at university. Now, what made you do that?
Yeah, why would you decide to do biblical studies at Newcastle University? Well, I think my parents were very keen that I progressed academically, and I went into sixth form and I hated it. I hated school generally, really. And then I did A-levels I really didn't like. Maths, further maths and physics. I mean, how can anybody be happy doing those sort of subjects? So I skived most of sixth form, scraped 2 A-levels. I don't know how I quite managed that. And then it was a question of, okay, so you're not going to get in to do law at Sheffield, so kind of going around clearing, talking to universities, and it was a case of, okay, well, let's do something I'm interested in. I was following Jesus at the time, so decided to have a go at something like biblical studies. And they were asking 2 B's and a C in those days. Well, I managed to get in on 2 E's. Shame on me, really. I wish I could have my time again and do different A-levels and do it all over again in a different way, but that's not how life works, is it?
So you did Bible studies because, so that wasn't going for a particular career? Was there strategy? What was your vision for the future?
Yeah, well, I really wanted to be involved in serving God in my life, but my immediate strategy was get a degree. Almost, when you're in my state, get any degree. And then use it to get a secular job and then see what happened afterwards. Yeah. So that's what I did. I had 3 years in Newcastle. It was a tough course for someone who was a professing Christian because the course was very anti-Christian in many ways, which is strange for a biblical studies degree.
We hear about that a lot.
That's the way it was, yeah.
So although you in the distant future, you wanted to work in Christian work of some sort. You wanted, I think you phrased it, to do something in the real world first. And the real world turned out to be Royal Mail.
Absolutely, yeah. I spent a number of years working for Royal Mail.
And you started in the very centre of London.
Yeah, I started in West Central District Office, New Oxford Street, bang in the middle of London when the IRA were setting off bombs in the middle of London.
And you settled in very well there, and that is when, in the church that you were attending, you met Jill.
Yes, I can just about remember that, yes.
I hope you do.
Yes. So, yes, I ended up going to a church in London, and I'd met Jill previously on a camp in Wales, and she just happened to be there that very first evening, when at a Saturday evening youth meeting, when I turned up in London and she was there.
And your friendship deepened, you got married, and I think before you got married you explained that you had a clear vision that sometime you would work full-time in church or Christian ministry. I assume she agreed.
Well, she married me, so she must have done. But yeah, absolutely. When we got married, or when we got engaged, and when she proposed to me, it wasn't quite like that. But at that time, I explained that very much in future days, I felt that the Lord would have me work in full-time Christian service in some sort of capacity. And I was already doing some preaching at that point, so I think it was in that kind of direction.
And meanwhile, you were in the real world. You were in Royal Mail. You ended up in Cambridge, travelling to mail centres across the east of England as a project manager. You were frustrated by the union-dominated environment, you said, but you clearly don't hide your faith. Indeed, you want to live it out. So how did you keep on good personal terms with union reps when you're arguing from the management in this war that there obviously is between management and unions?
Yeah, and they were interesting days because they were days really of a lot of industrial conflict within the company. And on strike days, my job was to drive a 7.5-ton vehicle because all managers had a strike job as well. But a lot of my job was about developing and implementing change, huge resistance, and some really big arguments and some strikes as a result. But it was really strange because I could have a real Barney of an argument in a meeting, and then I would go down to the canteen later, and the union rep would be sitting there, and I'd go and sit next to him, and I'd have a cup of tea with him. So it operated on different levels. So it was never personal. It was professional disagreement. And I remember coming towards the end of my time in Royal Mail, this particular man actually said to me, Al, he said, I know you're a Christian. He said, I'm not. I believe something, but I don't know what. He said, I'm going through a really difficult time. He just gave me a flavour of what it is and just said, will you pray for me?
My, oh my. You, the representative of the hated management.
Absolutely.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
I think we got you to the grand old age of 40. Your job in Royal Mail was fine. You obviously getting on very well and we're enjoying it. But you had declined all offers of promotion for about 10 years because you wanted time for church things and for your family. Let's just catch up. Your family, you had, 3 children?
3 children, girl, boy, girl.
Right. And as far as the church at that time, you were very involved as an elder. Now, for those who don't know what an elder is, it's a sort of unpaid, part-time, voluntary pastor. Is that right?
That's just about right, yeah.
Fine.
Certainly the unpaid bit, anyhow.
Yes. So, and you were working full-time with Royal Mail. But you weren't, this wasn't full-time ministry in the church, but people came to you for help for quite some serious things.
Yes. I was in a very privileged position, really, where the pastor, the minister of the church, allowed me to do everything in the church that he did, just in much smaller quantities, which was brilliant training for bits that came later. But yeah, there were 1 or 2 situations that really put me on the spot. For example, I was called one morning. I happened to be working at home. Normally I was travelling. And I got a telephone call saying this particular man who we'd been working with is trying to commit suicide. We can't get hold of the minister. Can you come down? Got to go to his house. I went to his house, and he was very unstable at that time. Had a knife in his hand. I didn't feel remotely threatened. But obviously I was much concerned for his safety, particularly as he was quite distressed. So there were 1 or 2 situations that were certainly challenging.
Yes. So you had the challenging work in the church, full-time work, which was quite challenging at Royal Mail, and you had a growing family to look after, and this is where your health began to be affected.
Yes, my health started to be affected at this point, but the real problems with my health came later than that. But yeah, I mean, first signs of anxiety, just those telltale signs at that particular point.
And so to relieve the pressure slightly, you resigned as an elder. But that town that you were in is very significant. And the stresses in the church were not the only stressful experiences, because this was Soham. And today, Soham has gained the notoriety with the murder of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman by Ian Huntley, and the false alibi provided by Maxine Carr. And when I read how close you and your family were to those events, my heart went out to you, because Jill worked closely with Maxine Carr in school, so it must have been very difficult for her.
Yeah, Jill worked with Maxine Carr the year before when things went wrong. And our son was in the school, in the same class, and Holly Wells lived next door but 1 to us in Soham. And my last memory of her was before we went on holiday. I put our family tent up on the front lawn, and just to check everything was working. And Holly Wells came and said, "Can I have a look inside the tent?" And that was the last time I saw her.
and very difficult. I mean, obviously difficult for you two, but for Tom as well. This must have been at that age quite unbelievable.
Yeah, it had a severe impact on all the children. It was literally the week before that our eldest daughter was walking in the same place as the two girls were walking. So you kind of think, what if? But yeah, a huge impact on children at that age. And the whole children within the school setup. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you read about in the newspaper and it happens out there somewhere else.
Right.
It never happens in your backyard. But the reality is sometimes it does happen in your backyard.
And one of the saddest things I think you said was a conversation you had with Tom.
Yeah, I mean, one of the conversations we had with him was quite telling, really. He said, you always said, if I had a problem, that I should go and talk to a teacher or a teaching assistant. Who do I talk to now? How do you answer that one?
See, most of us will have known about Sam, but as you say, that's distant. To realise what you and your family went through is very telling. As I said, you reach 40. The big question, you're enjoying work, but there's a nagging feeling you should be in full-time church or other ministry. So you did two things. You asked about voluntary redundancy from Royal Mail, and you went on a list of people looking for a church that needed a pastor or a minister. The first response from Royal Mail was a no, but that changed within months?
Yeah, I mean, I went to see my boss and said, things are happening. I said, any chance of redundancy? And he said, no, forget it. You won't get redundancy because you actually understand how one of his mega mail centres operates, and if you tweak this, that'll happen here. He said they won't want to lose that kind of expertise. Go away, get on with some work. And then it was literally about 2 months later, he asked me whether I'd drop into his office, and he said, we're having a major reorganisation. There are no jobs going to be left in this area of your grade. Therefore, we'd like to move you. And because I hadn't taken the latest promotions, I had a contract, I had an old-fashioned contract, and they couldn't force me to move. So I said, I'm not moving. What are you going to do? And thereafter, redundancy ensued.
Amazing. And as far as the church is concerned, there was a church, I mean, obviously your name was sent to various places, but there was a church in Northwich in Cheshire that asked you to visit with a view to becoming a pastor. You went to see them twice. You weren't impressed. You didn't want to accept the invitation.
Neither did my wife.
No, but you changed your mind between you during the 3-hour journey home. Why was that?
Yeah, we went to this church the first time, and quite frankly, the church building looked like a toilet block. Well, that's what the neighbours called it. It was kind of a grey breeze block. And when we got there, it was just uninspiring, really. I mean, nothing like a building like this. The congregation were few in number, a number of older people, which was great to have older people, a few younger people, but maybe, 20, 25 people there. And as far as I was concerned, I was going to a church in Surrey that was really interested. So we kind of went there. Actually, I'd flu at the time and ended up in bed afterwards. Anyway, we left there and said, well, thank goodness for that. We're not going back there again. And then they said, would we go back again? And I think reluctantly we said yes. And we had a good weekend with them. And then when we left the church, we were just feeling as we went home and talked that there was just a small core in there who had a vision for the future. And I felt I couldn't abandon them and walk away from them.
That was a small core, so that implies there are two parties involved, and it was not long, you became, I think we're talking about 2003, and it wasn't long before the divisions revealed themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think my honeymoon in the church lasted at least a week. It was increasingly evident that there were a whole kind of one group of people who didn't believe in doing any evangelism or sharing the gospel. They were of the mindset that you just preach the gospel and God will save people and you just get on and preach. And then another group who felt very much we should be involved in engaging the community and sharing the good news of Jesus.
But it's deeper than that, isn't it? Because that's a theological position, and there could still be, one would hope, with Christians, a sharing together. But I gather the church members' meetings at Northwich had quite a reputation.
Yes, and we came to one particular church members' meeting when we had appointed 2 extra elders, quasi-leaders, and this group of people said that they would not recognise them. And there ensued a parting of the ways that was not easy and not pleasant.
Because you had to challenge, because they've been elected with a very, very clear majority, and these people said, we're not going to accept it, so you would have to challenge those.
Absolutely. And in that meeting, I said, well, the vote has been taken now. The decision has been made. I need to ask you, will you respect the authority of these men who've been appointed in their job of co-leading the church? And they said, no, they couldn't accept it. So one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, I asked them to resign their membership. And they said no. So I had to bring a motion to the members' meeting that they be removed from membership, which was maybe one of the toughest things I've ever had to do.
And a huge majority supported you, and in other ways the life of the church was improving, but that first year took a huge toll on you, didn't it? You were mentally, physically and spiritually exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, just going through that, I don't particularly like conflict, which seems strange when I battled with the unions. But somehow in church it was far worse than that. And, I mean, it certainly took a toll on me. Even though from that point on, the church sprang into a whole period of new life and growth, and people coming to faith in Jesus. The numbers grew, everything changed radically. But as the church was kind of going up, I felt for a period of time I was going down.
And at one point you went to your room and wept. And from what you wrote, it sounds as if you were almost suicidal.
Yeah, I mean, I was very down at that time. I think in terms of being suicidal, that was later on, at another stage in my time of service. But this was the start of an on-off journey into anxiety and depression.
And you went to the doctor, he put you on medication and sent you for counselling. You came off medication, I think, after a year, but you say that the events scarred you long term. And I think there are 2 things here that you wrote that I find difficult to reconcile, because you say God put you there, and you quote the verse from Jeremiah, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And yet it ends up scarring you for life. So did you have strong words with God at that stage?
No, I didn't. But I've come to learn that God uses broken people, not people who think they can do everything in their own strength. And that's such an important lesson, because when we're broken and when we feel that we are not worthy, when we feel that we haven't got the strength to do something, that is the time when we can experience God's power in our lives. And that would certainly be my testimony.
And there's quite a testimony that follows, because the next 5 years, the work under your leadership went from strength to strength. But there was an impossible amount of work and you were exhausted. And at this point, you said you made a serious mistake with a couple who had fallen out with the previous church, asked you for membership, and you didn't listen to the warnings, subtle warnings, but you didn't notice them or didn't accept them. And they caused a split amongst the elders. You took responsibility for not doing due diligence and immediately resigned from your post. Was it really a resignation issue?
I think at that point, for 6 years, I'd been preaching 45 Sundays a year, morning and evening, doing a midweek meeting, leading the church roofing party, opening up so people could use the premises, closing up afterwards, doing pretty much everything, and I was exhausted. Clearly, I wanted the church to grow, and when you have people knocking at the door saying they want to join you, that's a great thing. And I think, well, I certainly did make a serious mistake in the sense that I was too willing to accept people in order that the church might grow, and people who I felt could serve in the church, not be passengers.
But it was not the mistake that made you decide to go. It was the lack of unity, presumably.
Yes, it was the fact that I made the mistake in not doing due diligence. And then when someone is starting to get involved in church life and becoming part of church life, and then ends up becoming particularly critical, that certainly moved me to a point where I felt I hadn't got anything left inside me to fight and keep on going. I'd done the fighting.
So you left that church, but less than a year later, you offered the role of co-pastor in a very large church some distance away. Had you not been battered enough?
Yeah, I'd been battered more than enough. So I went and did 9 months part-time working for a not-for-profit organisation that needed some help. They wanted a general manager part-time. And I went to do some pastoral work for another church. And at the end of a number of months, both of them offered me a full-time job. And my heart was still in full-time Christian ministry, serving God as a church pastor, church minister. And yeah, it was something I really wanted to do. And actually, it wasn't a hard decision, despite all the battering I'd gone through.
So you joined this church, your co-pastor became a friend. It must have been a great relief to be sharing the ministry.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was really good. It was really good just to share, to talk, to pray together, to talk through different issues and problems. Yeah, completely different.
And it worked well for several years. And then you realised that maybe you didn't have the health for church leadership and you resigned. But for years, this was something you felt God calling you to. How did you cope? Do you feel bitter?
I think I felt angry. I don't think I felt bitter. I just felt a sense of loss and disappointment. That I was walking away from a job that I loved, people that I loved, and we were very happy there, living there. We'd got our life very, very comfortable in the right sort of way, having built up a kind of links in the community and friends. And yeah, it was a very, very difficult time, but being a church pastor there, it wasn't really ever going to be the right thing to stay in the town. Because too many questions would be asked. and I certainly didn't want to be answering those questions in the community.
So you did something totally different. You did heavy goods vehicle training. Why did you do that?
Yeah, well, if you want to take your mind off something that is causing you huge pain, do something that distracts you 100%. So when you're learning to drive with a 40-foot trailer behind you, you can't think of anything else apart from what's that trailer doing at the back, which was actually really, really helpful.
You passed everything first time?
I did, incredibly. Yeah, I'm glad I passed it first time because it was so expensive to do it. And then for 6 months, I drove for a chicken company out, driving this articulated lorry out to remote farms in different parts of the country, picking up chickens and taking them on their final journey. Sorry, folks.
But then you decided you couldn't stay within the church, but you actually decided you shouldn't be in the area.
Yeah, we felt it would be wise to leave the area, yes.
So where did you go?
Well, if you don't know where to go, you go to Cornwall. And we'd had links for many, many years with a small village church that we knew in Cornwall. Jill and I had done evangelistic events for them. I'd preached there and taken services. And they'd always said, please come and help us. So it seemed the logical thing to do. So off we went down to Cornwall. Lovely little village with its own little harbour, little beach, view of the harbour from the back of our bungalow. And I even had a little boat, nothing posh, just a little boat in the harbour.
Well, it's clear you were ill with anxiety and depression when you moved to Cornwall, but you didn't seem to rest. From what I can understand, you did part-time driving of these 40-ton trailers delivering milk to supermarkets, including night shifts. You were fishing with your boat in the harbour and selling the produce. You led...
No, I never sold the produce. Let's be quite clear on that. I'd be prosecuted for that.
Oh, I see. But you were sharing the produce.
Sharing it.
You led and spoke on Oak Hall holiday trips, and we know Oak Hall, they're great friends up on the hill there. And this is the punchline, you became an elder in the local church and shared the preaching. All that pressure can't have helped your depression.
I'm normally a person who likes to be really busy. And there was nothing in terms of conflict in those roles that really exacerbated the depression. But nevertheless, the time that we spent in Cornwall, although it was the most beautiful place, and we enjoyed being there, and we certainly had no issues in the church, it was also a place of deep depression and anxiety, and that's when I hit my lowest.
I think you said it was Christmas 2017, your lowest point, when you were often going to your bedroom and crying uncontrollably. You said, I never doubted God or his goodness, but I wanted to die. That's a tension which is difficult to understand.
Yeah, I think when you get to that state mentally, it's very difficult to be rational. And it's very difficult to describe it to anybody who's not been in that position at all. But a real sense of just not wanting to be there, a real sense of just sorrow, really, and a feeling of being so down inside and not being able to cope. And yet, times when I just couldn't leave the room, or if I did, it was only for a short period, and incredibly distressing for my family as well, some of whom were with us that particular Christmas. It was a very, very low ebb.
And you had taken up cold water swimming, which was very healthy and helped in some ways, but then there were times, I think you were just thinking, do I just keep swimming?
Yeah, I mean, I took up cold water swimming. I'm slightly crazy. And started in the October and swam I would say 5 or 6 days a week normally. And then when you get to the winter, you keep on going. And when you get to February and it's 0 and the water's 7 degrees, you still go down there, strip, no wetsuit, and straight into the water and swimming. And I swam way out beyond the harbour regularly because my body had adapted. I could do 20 minutes even at the coldest point. Always had a watch on, so I knew how long I'd been out and could time it, and I knew when it would become dangerous. But yeah, getting so low that the huge temptation is, why don't you just keep on swimming?
Now, obviously, from various things throughout, it's clear that Jill was an amazing support for you, but it took a toll on her health as well.
Absolutely. I think when people go through depression, anxiety, often the forgotten person is the person who's doing the support at home. And looking back and having a greater degree of understanding, in some ways it's just as tough for that person because they give all of their emotion and energy. And Jill certainly did that in terms of looking after me, watching me, helping me when I was at my lowest point in a way that nobody else could. Which just was a huge testimony to her and also to the marriage commitments that she made many years ago. And if it wasn't for her, I don't know where I'd be. But inevitably, when someone gives so much of themselves to support me, there is a huge price that they pay. And a mental, physical, emotional exhaustion that hits them because it doesn't go away. It's there for week after week, unrelenting, and it's constantly on their mind.
It's interesting to hear people, you don't hear it very often, to hear people talk as frankly as that. This last week has been Mental Health Week, which is amazing. Has that sort of week, does that help explain to people so that they can understand when they come across people who are suffering?
Yes, I think so. And also I think we need to be more open about mental health. And certainly on the Oak Hall trips that we've talked about, sometimes I tell my testimony with regard to depression and anxiety. But what I also want to tell people is very much that God has kept me and upheld me even through the darkest moments. And in those very darkest moments where I didn't want to be, I never doubted his love and his grace. If anything, I just wanted to go and enter into it fully and completely. But he had other plans and intentions. But I have to testify through all of this to Jill and also to God for keeping me and sustaining me.
See, that's fascinating because that's so open and honest, because there are far too many Christians, it seems to me, who would say, well, if you're depressed, you're not close enough to the Lord.
If you've got a headache, do you take a tablet?
Right.
And if someone's got diabetes, do they have insulin? If I've got an imbalance of some chemical and I need some extra serotonin or something, I take a tablet. And I take tablets now. I'm not embarrassed to say that. And I suspect I'll be on tablets the rest of my life, although I think I'm relatively normal now. Well, as normal as I'm ever going to be. But yeah, I think as Christians, as believers, we need to be much more frank about this. When I go on an Oak Hall holiday and tell my testimony, I'll guarantee I'll have umpteen people throughout the rest of the week want to come and tell me about some of their battles of depression and anxiety. And they'll want to talk to me because they'll realise I get it and I understand.
Because sometimes we want to do the Lord's work for him and make out that we're perfect. So, yes, I'm a Christian. Whereas when we're clear we're vulnerable, we can actually talk more easily to people.
Yeah, indeed. We're flawed human vessels, and I'm certainly that.
That just after that Christmas, Jill found out about the lightning process, and you went on a 3-day course that January. You came back a different person, and even your GP was amazed.
Yeah. So we were pretty desperate, really. And when I was a pastor, I had 2 ladies who went on the lightning process because they struggled with chronic ME. They went at different times, and both of them, having gone through the process, got put together completely. And Jill was in contact with people who had actually been through the lightning process for depression and anxiety. We weren't earning a lot of money then because I was only trucking maybe 1 night a week on average. And it was £700. And Jill said, I really want us to spend the money and I want you to go on it because I just want to take every opportunity. And it was incredible. It's all to do with neuroplasticity, which is way beyond me, but it's about ways that the brain operates and impulses travel through the central nervous system. And it's about creating new defaults that the brain can go to. And it was learning how to create new defaults and then to make them the default.
Yes, I don't understand it either.
It's a new science. I'm not sure they understand it completely either.
Now, there was a downside in the improvement of your health because you now had energy, you had drive again, but you got bored. And several churches approached you about becoming their pastor. Were you tempted?
I was tempted by a couple of churches that I knew, yes, but common sense prevailed. And I felt it would be unwise to go into full-time Christian ministry again.
Except you are in full-time Christian ministry, but
oh yeah, I forgot that bit. Yes,
but not in a church.
Yeah,
because we saw that at the beginning. And in fact, this is when you saw an advert for the director of this mission organisation. You were astonished to discover that you could tick every box on the skills required, and so that's why you ended up with People International.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't happen in life, again, that you can look at a person's specification and you go tick, tick, normally, and you go question mark, well, I'm not sure about that one, but I might wing it, and you go down. But I could tick every single one. And I started a conversation with the chair of trustees and then decided to apply for the job, even though I knew it would take us away from Cornwall.
And you came to live in Kent, because that's where the head office is, of the...
Yeah, actually, Jill was leading an Oak Hall trip in Montenegro, and I was speaking on it. And we flew into Gatwick, having got up at the equivalent of 3 o'clock in the morning. We flew into Gatwick, where our car was. We travelled across to Tunbridge Wells, and in the afternoon, I had 2 hours of interviews. And then at 5 p.m, we jumped in the car and I drove back to Cornwall. The next morning they said, we'd love to offer you the job. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. Take me on.
I know we've been running through such a rich life, and if you've got questions, in a couple of minutes, we'll open it to the floor so you can ask your questions. But it's amazing how I picked you up when you said, leaving ministry, because you are in ministry, but when that was maybe a slip of the tongue when you said it, does that mean in one sense you feel what you're now doing is not what you really think God wanted you to do?
Wow, that's a good question. I would like to say, first of all, I think God's left the best till last, which I think is an amazing testimony. And maybe the years in pastoral ministry have equipped me for what will probably be my last kind of full-time job. Well, I certainly hope it will be, because I've no intentions of going quite yet. So I get to use a pastoral background. I get to teach the Bible in some remote locations. Along with Jill, I get to pastor our workers, overseas. And I also get to use my kind of business background too, which is needed to run the organisation. So I see it as actually incredibly liberating. I've got an amazing board of trustees who basically said, we need to rejuvenate this work and move it forward. And they've been so supportive. And we've come up with loads of ideas. We run an experienced underground church simulation. We do trips to Central Asia. And we've just been so busy. And it's been liberating in that sense for me to actually shape the organisation over the last 4 to 5 years. And I love what I do, even though it takes over all my life. And Jill will tell you she feels that she lives People International. And I need to get myself organised and take some time off. But when you're the boss, it doesn't quite work like that all the time. But yeah, I really love it. And I love the people that I work with. And who else can actually say they love 90% of their job? There's always 10% you don't like.
But it still sounds a very pressured life. How is your health now?
My health, in God's goodness, is remarkably good. 2 years ago, I cycled from Land's End to John O'Groats. Last year, I did a tour of North Wales. They are my release mechanisms when I need to kind of make myself really tired and use all my energy. I have a toolbox to use if I feel mentally that I'm under pressure. But I don't think I've even used that toolbox for the last 2 years. And since I came back off the lightning process, in God's generous goodness, I've really been as strong mentally as I've been for many, many years. Maybe since that time at age 40, which is amazing that God is just equipping me and giving me the strength, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, to do this particular job that he wants me to do.
Al, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
So back to you, sir.
Right, thank you, Al. Right, you have a chance to ask questions. But before we do, I'm going to give Al just a couple of minutes to kind of just relax. I'm going to ask you to talk in your tables and discuss any questions you might want to raise, okay? You've had a chance just for a moment to reflect on what was said. And I think Al was very brave to share so openly and so personally. So who would like to kick off with the first question?
Yeah, thanks, Al. Very interesting talk. Right. I would have liked some more detail about the work you're doing at the moment in the Central Asian republics. Does your work involve sort of dealing with local ministers and pastors, and how does it operate exactly?
Yeah, both me and our workers. Our job primarily is to work and support the national church in these countries, even though it is very, very small. And often just small cells of 8 or 10 people. So very much I'm involved when I go out there in teaching some of these pastors who are first generation. They only have a Bible. They don't have any other Christian literature. They don't have any of the benefits that we have of a kind of a Christian heritage. And the explaining of the Bible is done almost like a holy thought, because that's as far as they can go. So we work alongside them.
Who would like to ask the next question? Rosemary.
How do you manage the language problems? Can't imagine you speak all their languages.
I speak every language fluently, but I'm struggling with English. Yeah, the language is really interesting. Most of these countries in the northern swathe used to speak Russian as the government language. ex-Soviet Union. Obviously fell out in 1991. And then, as a result of that, there's been a gradual shift towards national languages. But that has accelerated over the last 3 years. As these countries, they're trying to not provoke the big bear that lives to the north, that's Russia, but at the same time they want to exert their national independence. So Uzbek is becoming much more popular in Uzbekistan and becoming the national language. Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Tajik. So there's absolutely no way that there's a common language that I could even attempt to learn, even if I was clever enough to do that. Remember, I only got 2 E's at A level. So Google Translate's brilliant for day-to-day conversation. But when I'm actually teaching and speaking, I have a translator to do that, translating sometimes into 2 languages, but often just into 1 language. So I'm very reliant on people to help with translation.
Anyone else?
I can order 4 cups of tea in Russian, even if there's only 2 of us.
Al, thank you again for your openness and honesty in your talk. It was super. Can I ask you 2 questions? First of all, you said right at the beginning that as a young man you were following Jesus at that time. Can you tell us how you came to be following Jesus? And secondly, has there at any point in your lows been a time when you felt God has deserted you?
Okay. So first of all, I was brought up in a Christian home, and I had the huge privilege of being taken to a church where the Bible was explained and the gospel was explained. I remember being in church as a young lad on a Sunday evening, hearing about following Jesus, heaven, hell, and decisions that needed to be made. And I remember going home that night and saying to my dad I was really concerned and needed to get things sorted out. And I remember going into the front bedroom, I picture it now, kneeling down next to the dressing table and praying with him. And I believe in a very simple way, I put my trust in Jesus then. I can't give you exact age. I can remember the event, but I have no idea exactly when it was. And then there were times as I grew up when I reaffirmed my faith in Christ as I understood more. Have I ever felt God has abandoned me? The honest answer is no. I've never felt God's abandoned me. I'm much more worried that I might abandon God, because I'm a frail human being and my faith is very weak. And obviously as you go through life you have many questions, and maybe as you get older you have more questions than you ever had. And my prayer throughout life is that when I don't have the strength to cling on to God, he will hold me in the hollow of his hand and keep me close to him. And that's my ongoing prayer.
Anyone else? You see how they keep me fit walking around the place?
Well, I was going to say they're actually very good at asking questions, aren't they?
Thank you. That was so fascinating to see the path that you've come through. Sorry, can you, the lightning course, the 3 days, which was so transformative, what happened there? And also, you know, what did you actually do to be transformed? And also, I'm just interested why at Newcastle University, my hometown, the biblical studies course was so anti-Christian.
Okay, let me start with the biblical studies, really. In that department, we had a professor who was very liberal, and then we had a New Testament lecturer who was very bitter against Christianity. And he actually said at one point his aim was to destroy as many Christian faiths as he could, because he felt people were deluded in following Jesus. Ironically, the person who was most sympathetic was a Greek Orthodox priest who did amazing lectures and seminars on early Christian doctrine, which I found fascinating, along with the early church fathers. So that was the Newcastle bit. What was the other bit?
What happened to you at the lightning?
Oh, the lightning course. Yeah, I mean, I could take a long time at trying to explain it because they take 3 days to do it. And they also give you a process to follow whereby you deliberately break the thought patterns that you have that are not healthy. And you go back to a time and you relive a time when you were thinking in a different way, and you reinforce that into the present thinking. A little bit like the psalmist, I think, who is in the depths of despair, and as he looks back, he reminds himself of everything that God has done. And kind of having reminded himself of that, it helps him in the present. And there's a similarity to that. It's not a Christian program whatsoever, but I felt it had a kind of a biblical kind of resonance to it as far as I used it in the process that I was taught. So basically they teach you a process. So when you get these bad thoughts, I was driving home from Yorkshire on Friday night, reasonably fast, and I thought I'd got nicked twice by a camera, okay? Well, this is a bit of exaggeration, okay, it's an example. So then I immediately think, oh goodness me, I might get a course from the first one, I might get tickets, 3 points from the next one. Oh no, that's my lorry license in jeopardy. And if I lose, and then I'm going to have to notify the insurance. Can you see it builds up to get bigger and bigger and bigger? And this course teaches you to break it and then start thinking in a different way. Other than that, please look on the internet. I don't get commission or anything. All I can say is it worked for me. But you have to go into it really wanting to get better. You have to engage with it.
You really sound like a Geordie, don't you? Any other questions? Right, I'll Rosemary again, then I'll come to you.
Just a very quick one. Is it lightning course or lightening course?
Lightning.
Tell she was a school teacher, can't you?
Oh, here's trouble.
We've known each other for many years now, but some of us may not have heard of People International. There are so many charities around. How can we best pray for you and the work? And I believe on occasions you travel around the country looking for people to volunteer their services. I wonder what sort of uptake you get, because it's quite an unusual area for anybody to willingly go to.
Yeah, it's an area of the world that people know very, very little about. We'll bring some maps in afterwards and you can take some away. If you want to pray and find out more about this region, then we produce a quarterly newsletter. And if you want to receive that completely free, I think we've probably got a list in the car, and you can just stick your name down there and we'll make sure you get that. It's not so, we're not after money. We never talk about money in our meetings. We want people to pray for Central Asia because it's such a desperately needy area of the world. So Uzbekistan, 35 million people, maybe 5,000 Uzbek believers in the whole country. That's it. And most of them are in Tashkent, the capital city. In the rural provincial towns and cities, often no believers whatsoever. Whole people groups of 2 million where there are no believers at all. So we're really keen to get people praying for this area of the world. So please take some literature. If you want to receive an update, do sign up. And we are really, really keen for more workers to go to Central Asia. So if you know of people who are exploring whether God would have them serve overseas, and we would certainly love to have a conversation with them. In God's goodness, we've gone up from 14 long-term workers overseas 4 years ago to 27 right now, and we've got more in the pipeline. But quite frankly, 27 is a drop in the ocean with 600 million people unreached in that area of the world.
Anyone else?
We have 27 workers from through the UK office into Central Asia. Yeah.
Al, thank you very much. I have read reports and hear rumours that within Muslim countries there is a distinct movement of God's Spirit and Muslim people are meeting Jesus. Particularly through meeting him in dreams, for example, and coming to faith.
Yeah.
Have you detected this in the STAN countries that you are working in?
No, we haven't detected it in the STAN countries, but we have most certainly found this to be taking place in Iran. There is a real incredible movement taking place in Iran. I am not a dreams and visions person, but I cannot deny that God is doing something very special there. And over again, thousands of times, people are having a dream about meeting Jesus. They wake up and then the next day they go looking to find who Jesus is. And Iran has the fastest growing church in Central Asia. And incredibly, there's also a movement across the whole Iranian diaspora worldwide, including in the UK, where a lot of Iranians are coming to faith in Jesus. It's the one country where the gospel is flourishing at the moment, despite the persecution that people walk into straight away. But that is not happening in the STAN countries generally. Somehow, God through his Spirit has just poured his blessing on Iran.
For now, it could be changing. Anybody else want to ask a question? Are you allowed to ask one more? You just did.
Al, you said that you ask for prayer and not for money. Can I ask how you're funded? You know, where's the money coming from?
Our workers are self-funded, so they raise their support through their sending church and other churches that they partner with. In terms of an admin office, I'm a Yorkshireman, so I run it lean and mean. We don't waste a penny. And we operate off gifts that are made to us from churches and from individuals. And a number of charities have gone through difficult times. We've gone through a slightly difficult time, but for a different reason. We've had to spin off one of the charities that was under our umbrella because it was working in Russia, which we can no longer do. That's caused us a headache. But God has been incredibly good to us, and we are forging ahead this year with all of our activities to engage the UK with gospel work in Central Asia.
Does anybody have a last question? Al, thank you very much. One of the things this morning when I was preaching, it was 1 Peter chapter 5, and part of it was the fact that we are going to suffer if we serve the Lord, and we have an enemy who is a raging lion. And when you talk about the difficulties you faced, I mean, it's the grace of God that sustains you, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I just praise God for the work you're doing and what you've shared this evening. And also to Jill. I'm glad you said about Jill, because the wives of clergy and missioners often seem to go into the shadows and are forgotten. But thank you for what you do. It's very important. I'm going to offer a word of prayer. Let's pray. Father, we do praise you for the work you're doing. We never really understand what you do, why you do it, where you do it, but I thank you for what is happening in Iran. We've heard about what is happening there, how you're reaching out and Muslims are seeking Jesus and they're becoming believers. And Lord, we know from experience that when people have that encounter with Jesus and their lives are transformed, they become missionaries because, Lord, they just can't keep it all in. And Lord, whatever you're going to do in the future, we do pray for the countries that we call STAN countries, that they too will experience this movement of your Holy Spirit. We pray for the 27 workers who now are working, particularly those who are at times very lonely. Lord, in that loneliness, may they encounter you in new ways and discover more about you, about your sufficiency, your grace, your love, your tenderness. your gentleness. And I pray for Al and Jill. I pray your protection upon both of them in their health and upon the family. And I ask, Lord, that you will just minister mightily through them and through the organization they work with. Father, this has been a blessing this evening, and we thank you for it. And Lord, we just ask in Jesus' name that you be with each one of us as we leave here, as we travel to our homes, and in the days and the weeks ahead. In Christ Jesus. Amen. And now I've been asked on behalf of the church just to contribute to your personal costs. You're very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen.